Hey there, guys. Welcome to this Holy Shed Light. As you probably know, I am taking things a little bit easier for a few weeks, though you probably wouldn't notice that if you were here with me. But for the rest of this month, I'm doing a slightly trimmed down version of the Holy Shed. And today, I'm wanting to address a great question from Susie, a regular Shedster, who writes, Dave, would love to know your perspective on Jesus sending demons into the herd of pigs. It has always puzzled me. Well, Susie, you are certainly not alone. I'm sure lots of us are puzzled and perplexed by this story, not least because, well, what is all this sending demons into a herd of pigs about? I'm going to assume that you understand what I'm talking about, that you know this story, but if you want a refresher, it's in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 20. There's also a version of it in Matthew and Luke as well, so it was quite an important story to the early Christians. The conventional interpretation, preached in a million sermons, some of which I'm sure you've heard, sees this simply as another miracle story. A wild man in the tombs, haunted by demons, who Jesus delivers, but with this particular bizarre twist that the demons cast out are allowed to enter a herd of pigs who, career down the hillside, charging down over a cliff and drown in the sea. Marvellous, job done. But you know what? A bit of background knowledge and also an eye and sensitivity towards symbolism can change everything. And let me say right from the start, I don't think Jesus literally sent a bunch of demons into some pigs. I don't think any animals were hurt in the making of this story. Why? Because it's not that kind of story. I'm with Amy Jill Levine. Regular Shedsters will know about her. I've talked about Amy quite a lot, AJ, she likes to be called a lot of times. She's a Jewish person who happens to teach New Testament. And I'm with her and quite a lot of other commentators who see this story as basically parable rather than history. But that shift in genre doesn't in any way diminish the truth or the usefulness of this narrative. Actually, I think it enhances its significance. I am quite sure that the first audience who heard or read this story knew what it was all about without any big question. They understood this is political. It's a political commentary, political satire, actually. John Dominic Crossan, a leading Jesus scholar, he describes it as resistance satire, which he says is blatantly mocking Roman imperialism as demonic possession. And make no mistake, there's lots of politics in the Gospels. And this story of the Gadarene demoniac, I think, is about imperial domination, what it does to people and how Jesus challenged it throughout his life and ministry. Not long before any of the Gospels was written, the ancient city of Gerasa, which is now, I think, somewhere in Jordan, was the site of a brutal attack by the Roman Emperor Vespasian, in which over 1,000 young men, Jews, were slaughtered right there at the location of this story. The soil was soaked in blood and would have been known about for that very reason by anybody in that region. It was also an area where veteran Roman soldiers were given land as payment for successful military campaigns. So in contemporary terms, they were like the settlers that now exist in Palestine. They were like the settlers who took over the residents' land. Gerasa was basically contaminated by imperial violence and corruption. And the whole story is just packed with symbolism to this effect. The man's name is Legion, right? A word that meant only one thing at the time, a large Roman division of imperial soldiers, between 4,000 and 6,000. And the military images just roll on. The term herd, the herd of pigs, was a routine slang word to describe the new recruits. They were the herd. To dismiss the demons, as Jesus did, that word dismiss was a military command. And charging down the hill, is a word also used to describe an army charging into battle. This whole thing, was a sarcastic caricature of military might. As for the pigs, well, as we know, they had great significance, both to Jews, for whom they were considered to be unclean and forbidden to be eaten, but pigs were hugely significant also in Roman cultic rituals and sacrifices. The symbol of the hated occupying force at that time was a pig, and you can see pictures of it on the internet. Of them carrying these great banners with an image of a pig, probably a boar, actually. Personally, I have to say, it makes me really sad that pigs feature in the story in the way that they do. I think pigs are amazing, intelligent creatures. But I must tell myself that this story is not about actual pigs, but what they represented to people at that time. To the original audiences, this account symbolizes Jesus cleansing the land from the Romans, from the pigs, which of course is a term that's used today in many quarters, an urban term for the police. Meanwhile, the demonized man symbolizes the spirit of a people suffering, tormented under occupation, stripped of dignity, living with, the chains of domination. And significantly, it says he lived among the tombs, among the memories of his people. He's a deeply emblematic man or figure of a crushed people to whom Jesus brings good news of liberation. So, I hope even by now, and what I'm saying, you see, there's a whole nother story underneath this story, which from our perspective, especially when we've heard it interpreted through 1,000 sermons, just takes us down the wrong direction. And one other thing, the term gospel, which are now, of course, is, a traditional religious Christian term, but the Greek word euangelion, which literally means gospel or evangel, actually carried intense political implications in the first century. The evangel or gospel wasn't a new idea that Jesus or his disciples invented. It was already, in the in the air at the time. It was a term in common use by the Romans, which the early church appropriated and recontextualized. In the missions of ancient Rome to conquer the world, Caesar sent envoys ahead of his armies to try and come to a peaceful settlement before they, poured in with all the military might. And so these envoys would go with good news, evangelion, they would go with good news, an invitation, which they couldn't refuse, to join in, to be part of Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. It was like a kind of ancient protection racket, in a sense. Join us or else. Submit to our authority, pay us taxes, or face the consequences. So the evangel, the good news of Rome, was about domination and submission to the emperor, whose title, by the way, was Son of God, which brings new and vivid meaning to the introduction to Mark's Gospel, where it says, Mark's Gospel opens with the words, the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, to modern Christian ears, this is, a relatively innocuous beginning by the writer. But back then, that statement was political dynamite. It was a challenge to empire. There's so much of this in the New Testament that is lost on us 2,000 years later with all the grooming that we've had within the Christian subculture. So what we really have here is a story about Jesus imbibing the ancient Hebrew prophetic spirit, leading a non-violent grassroots revolt against the cult of Caesar, confronting violent militarism in a deeply significant, blood-soaked location of conflict between Jews and Romans. In subtle but powerful ways, the gospel shows Jesus challenging the meta-narrative of Rome. the kingdom of God versus empire. In its original context, the gospel is not about individual bliss in the afterlife, which it's sadly become now. The ministry, the crucifixion, the resurrection of Christ offered a fundamental counter-imperial proclamation which was subversive to its core. But of course, it wasn't a violent revolution. It was, still is, a revolution of God's uncontrolling love. Jesus did not call his disciples to take up arms, but to lay them down. He brought a new commandment, central to his entire project: love one another as I have loved you. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. Such statements stand in stark contrast to the world that they inhabited, a world of violence and coercion and empire. The early church remained completely non-violent right up to Constantine in the 4th century, when the church became modelled around Roman imperialism. Later, Augustine articulated the idea of a just war, and people have argued about what constitutes just ever since. But that's the whole Constantine element is another whole dimension, which we'll cover in another session. So finally, I'm sorry, and I apologise to pigs. I'm sorry the pigs get caught up in the narrative which was never about them. It offers no mandate for mistreating pigs or any other animals. It says nothing, in essence, about species superiority or any of that kind of stuff. Rather, it is an exciting, parabolic narrative about resistance to empire, whatever form that takes. And believe me, empire is still very much a reality in the 21st century, and we're still having to decide, where we stand with so many things going on in our world. Desmond Tutu famously said, "When people say that religion and politics don't mix, I wonder which Bible it is that they're reading." Friends, we live in a time of deep political, social and spiritual turmoil in which we cannot remain neutral. But the choice, isn't sort of on that surface level of, are you left or right, Tory, Labour, Democrat, Republican, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. The choice is about following Jesus and the values of the kingdom or the realm of God, which he brought, expressed in justice and fairness, in peace, in uncontrolling love. And it's a choice between that or going along with empire in the many ways in which that is expressed in our world through oppression and prejudice and discrimination. And, it's everywhere, and the choice is now over to us. So I hope that gives you a slightly different perspective on this story. And I've had some other questions about parables and stuff in the New Testament, so I'll probably spend this little time of Holy Shed Lights talking about some of them too. But if there are questions raised by what I've said or other things that you'd like to ask about, do message me. I'm keeping an eye on emails and messages on Facebook and all the rest of it. So hope you are enjoying your August, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me. Oh, by the way, if you like what I'm doing here in the shed, you can support us. You just have to follow this link on the screen now to my Ko-fi site. That's ko-fi. It's also in the descriptions on the videos and on the audio podcast. And we are so grateful to all of you who support us in this way and in other ways too. It's much appreciated. Thank you so much.